A millionaire abandoned his son on Christmas night to die in the snow. A year later, he received a Christmas present that left him frozen. Noah, a 9-year-old boy, was sitting at the kitchen table with shining eyes as he watched the blinking lights on the Christmas tree. He had helped decorate every detail, from the ornaments to the star on top. The excitement was evident in every movement, in every word that escaped his small, hurried mouth. "Dad, have you decided what we're going to do on Christmas Day?" he asked, full of expectation, as he held a cup of hot milk between his little hands. Harrison, his father, was standing by the sink, mechanically cleaning a knife with a cloth. The expression on his face was closed, almost indifferent. He cast a quick glance at his son, but his eyes lacked the warmth Noah expected. "Christmas is just another day," he replied, his voice dry as he turned the knife between his fingers, the metal glistening under the kitchen light. Noah tilted his head, feeling the coldness in his father's reply, but refusing to let it spoil his joy. "But Dad, it's Christmas. We can have a special dinner, or maybe go out to see the city lights." "I can help cook. I promise I won't mess anything up." He gave a broad smile as if he wanted to infect his father with his excitement. Harrison let out a short, humorless laugh, turning his attention back to the cloth and knife in his hands. "We don't have time for those nonsense things. Do whatever you want, but don't count on me." The silence that followed was almost palpable, but Noah, in his innocence, didn't allow his father's lack of enthusiasm to extinguish his joy. He began humming a Christmas song softly, looking at the tree and imagining what the big day would be like. He was sure that deep down, his father might change his mind and end up participating. After all, it was Christmas, and no one could resist the magic of that day. On a cold morning, with the biting wind beating against the windows of the house, Noah was sitting at the table, awaiting breakfast. He swung his legs, as he always did, while looking at the empty plate in front of him. Harrison entered the kitchen with a steaming cup in his hands. He seemed calmer than usual, but his expression was still hard to decipher. "Noah," he called, placing the cup in front of the boy. "You're growing up. It's time to try coffee. It'll give you energy for the day." The boy looked at the cup with curiosity. He had never had coffee before, but his father's tone seemed gentle, almost welcoming, and that encouraged him. "Thank you, Dad," he said, picking up the cup with both hands. He took a small sip, frowning as he tasted the bitter drink. "It's strange," he commented, trying to hide his discomfort. "It's like that at first," Harrison replied with a slight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Keep drinking, you'll get used to it." Trusting his father, Noah took another sip, trying to ignore the strong, bitter taste. But something was wrong. Soon after swallowing, he felt a strange sensation spreading through his body. His vision began to blur and a faint buzzing filled his ears. "Dad," he murmured, his voice weak as he let the cup slip from his hands. The vessel fell to the floor, shattering into pieces, but Noah barely noticed. He tried to say something else, but his strength abandoned him. His head lolled to the side and he slumped in the chair, unconscious. Harrison stood still for a moment, watching the boy with a cold expression. He showed no surprise or concern, only a calculating look. "Finally," he muttered to himself, leaning down to pick up Noah's limp body in his arms. He lifted him effortlessly, as if it were just another task in his routine. Carrying the boy, Harrison left the kitchen and walked down the hallway, his footsteps echoing through the silent house. The Christmas tree that Noah loved so much blinked in the background, its lights reflecting on the floor as if trying to illuminate a dark moment. When he reached the boy's room, Harrison laid him on the bed carefully, arranging him as if putting him to sleep. He stood there for a few seconds, observing Noah's serene, now lifeless face. "It's for a greater good," he said softly, as if trying to justify his actions to himself. Then he left the room, closing the door behind him. Outside, the house seemed plunged into an almost surreal tranquility, but inside something terrible was happening. And in that boy's heart, so full of dreams and hopes, Christmas was beginning to turn into something very different from what he had imagined. Christmas night came, but Harrison's house was shrouded in a frightening silence. The lights on the tree, which once shone with joy, now blinked solitarily, illuminating the room with a cold glow. Noah remained unconscious in his bed, breathing slowly and rhythmically, oblivious to what was happening around him. In the kitchen, Harrison looked at the clock as he adjusted the heavy coat he was wearing. He had made his decision. The plan was clear in his mind. That night, he would get rid of Noah. For Harrison, the boy was a burden, a constant reminder of responsibilities he didn't want to bear. "It's better this way," he muttered to himself in a low, cold voice. "He has no one. No one will miss him." Harrison went up the stairs slowly, his steps echoing through the empty house. When he reached Noah's room, he carefully opened the door, observing the still, motionless boy. The boy's expression was serene, almost angelic, as if he were dreaming of something better than the reality he lived in. But this did not shake Harrison's determination. Without saying a word, he entered the room, picked up the boy in his arms and adjusted the light body against him. Noah was so small, so frail, that he seemed even more defenseless in his father's arms. Harrison looked at the boy's face for a moment, but there was no regret in his eyes, only a cold void. Going down the stairs, Harrison avoided looking at the Christmas tree. He didn't want to think about how Noah had dedicated himself to that decoration, the joy the boy had felt hanging each ornament. To him, that was nothing but useless sentimentality. When he reached the door, he pushed it open, letting the cold night wind invade the house. Outside, the snow covered everything in a white blanket, and the cold air cut like blades. Harrison headed towards the car parked at the entrance, his steps leaving deep marks in the soft snow. He carefully placed Noah in the back seat, adjusting the seatbelt as if the boy was still conscious to notice. Starting the car, Harrison drove down the deserted road, the silence broken only by the sound of the engine and the wind blowing against the windows. He chose an isolated path, far from any movement. The place he had in mind was perfect, a clearing in the middle of a forest, where the snow fell heavier and where no one would look. When he finally arrived at the spot, Harrison turned off the engine, the sound of the car disappearing into the frozen vastness of the night. He remained in the seat for a few seconds, taking deep breaths as he observed the scenery before him. The forest was plunged into an almost absolute darkness, except for the faint glow of the moon reflecting on the snow that covered the ground like a white and immaculate carpet. He looked through the rearview mirror, seeing Noah's small body lying in the back seat, still motionless, and gripped the steering wheel tightly before finally getting out of the car. The cold night air hit his face like a slap, but he didn't hesitate. Harrison opened the rear door and picked up Noah in his arms again. The boy seemed even smaller and more fragile under the weight of his unconsciousness, and the falling snow melted upon touching his skin, forming small drops that trickled down his inert face. Harrison stared at the boy for a long moment, his expression serious and impassive. "You were never strong enough," he muttered, his voice broken by the vapor coming out of his mouth. It was almost as if he were trying to justify his actions to himself. The world has no place for the weak. He began to walk through the snow, each step leaving deep marks that would soon be erased by the incessantly falling snow. His arms carried the boy carefully, but his eyes remained fixed on the path ahead. When he reached the center of the clearing, he stopped, looking around to make sure the place was isolated. The silence was almost deafening, broken only by the muffled sound of his footsteps in the snow and the whisper of the wind through the trees. Harrison knelt down slowly, placing Noah on the ground with a strange tenderness, as if he were dealing with something precious. The contrast between the care of his gestures and the cruelty of his intention was almost disconcerting. He stood there for a few moments, looking at the boy's serene face. For a brief moment, his thoughts seemed to waver. He remembered when he held Noah in his arms as a baby, how he laughed loudly when he heard the stories Harrison told, how he looked at his father with unwavering admiration. But then, like a shadow extinguishing any trace of light, the hardness returned to his face. He shook his head, pushing away the memories that threatened to divert his plan. "This is for the best," he whispered to himself, slowly rising to his feet. "For him, and for me." Harrison took a few steps back, observing the boy's body in the snow, as if he were bidding farewell to something he no longer wanted to carry. He returned to the car, his steps slow and determined. When he got in and closed the door, he gripped the steering wheel tightly, his fingers digging into the worn leather. The silence inside the car seemed to amplify his thoughts, each one more cruel than the other. For an instant, he hesitated. His eyes turned to the rearview mirror, as if expecting to see something that could stop him from going forward. But there was nothing but darkness. He took a deep breath, pressing his foot on the pedal and starting the engine again. The car began to move, the headlights cutting through the cold night as he moved away from the clearing without looking back. The snow continued to fall, slowly covering the footprints he had left behind. Noah's body remained there, small and motionless, a solitary figure surrounded by the white vastness. The wind picked up, howling through the trees as if lamenting the cruelty of that night. But the forest remained indifferent, a silent witness to a story marked by betrayal and coldness. When Harrison disappeared into the darkness of the road, the world around seemed to hang suspended in time. The night was so silent that each snowflake appeared to fall in slow motion, and there in the frozen clearing the boy lay, a fragile and vulnerable contrast amidst the relentless force of nature. Noah opened his eyes slowly, feeling the biting cold of the snow against his skin. The world around him was white and indistinct, with shadows of trees extending over him in the moonlight. For a moment he couldn't understand where he was or what had happened. His mind seemed foggy, as if he were emerging from a confused nightmare. He tried to get up, but something was wrong. His body wouldn't move. Panic began to take hold of him. He tried to move his arms, but they were motionless, buried in the snow. He tried to move his legs, but they seemed unresponsive. "What's happening?" he thought, desperation growing with every second. He opened his mouth to scream, but his voice was weak, almost inaudible, muffled by the cold wind that cut through the air. His eyes began to tear, not just from the intense cold, but from the fear that now completely consumed him. He tried to remember what had happened before waking up there. He remembered the coffee mug, the strange feeling of weakness. And then everything became a blur. "Dad," he thought, his eyes wide, "why did you do this to me?" The cold seemed to worsen with every second. The snow piled around his body, covering part of his clothes, and the wind whistled as if mocking his despair. Noah tried desperately to move any muscle, any finger, but nothing responded. He could feel his heart pounding fast in his chest, as if his body knew it was in danger but unable to react. "Someone, please help me," he thought, trying to scream again, but his voice came out only as a whisper lost in the wind. His eyes began to fill with tears, and he blinked with difficulty to prevent them from freezing on his cheeks. "I don't want to die here. Please, don't leave me here." Noah tried to take a deep breath to calm himself, but the icy air burned in his lungs. He could feel the ice starting to penetrate his skin, the paralysis now mixed with unbearable cold. He knew that if he couldn't move, the cold would eventually win. His mind began to fill with confused thoughts, the idea of being left to die in the snow terrifying him more with every passing moment. "I need to get out of here," he thought, as tears streamed down his face, mingling with the incessant falling snowflakes. But his will seemed powerless against the state of his body. All he could do was look up at the sky above, where the stars shone indifferently, and wait. Noah tried to remember his mother's face, the times when she hugged him and promised that everything would be all right. He tried to cling to that memory as an anchor, but the reality around him was overwhelming. He was alone, paralyzed, and the world seemed to have forgotten him. The despair began to give way to a deeper fear. The cold advanced ever further, and his tired mind began to fog up again. Noah knew he needed to fight to stay awake, but fatigue and cold were relentless. As his eyes began to close again, a single thought crossed his mind. "I don't want to give up. I can't give up." Even paralyzed, even unable to move or call for help, something inside Noah still refused to give up. He didn't know how, but he was determined to survive. The wind howled around him, as if testing his willpower, as he struggled not to be overcome by the darkness that threatened to engulf him again. The snow continued to fall relentlessly, the thick, heavy flakes covering Noah's motionless body, as if nature itself was trying to erase him from existence. He could feel the weight of the snow gradually increasing on his chest, pressing his breath shallower and shallower. His mind spun in despair as he realized what was happening. I'm being buried alive," he thought, panic turning every thought into a silent plea for help. He tried to scream again, but his voice barely came out as a hoarse whisper. The cold made his throat burn, and the wind seemed to carry any sound he could produce away. "Please, someone, help me," he thought, as the flakes continued to accumulate, covering his legs, his torso, and starting to touch his face. Noah tried to move his head, but his body remained inert, a prison that kept him at the mercy of the relentless weather. He could feel the cold, damp snow seeping through the gaps in his clothes, like needles piercing his skin. Every second seemed an eternity, and the despair inside him grew exponentially. "I don't want to die," he thought repeatedly, tears streaming from his eyes and freezing before they reached his cheeks. In the distance, the village houses glowed with Christmas lights, their windows framed by garlands and colorful decorations. Inside them, families laughed, celebrated, and exchanged gifts. The sound of Christmas carols escaped through the cracks of the windows, muffled by the snow, but enough to reach Noah as a cruel irony. They were too busy, immersed in their own happiness, to notice the boy being swallowed by the snow in the darkness of the night. "Why doesn't anyone come?" he thought, his chest tight with the feeling of abandonment. "Does no one care? Does no one see me?" He tried to comfort himself with the idea that someone somewhere would notice his absence, but reality hit him hard. He had no one. His mother was gone, and his father, the one who should have protected him, had left him to die. The snow continued to accumulate, now covering part of his face. He tried to turn his head to prevent the flakes from filling his mouth and nose, but it was useless. The feeling of suffocation increased, and despair took over completely. "I need to get out of here," he thought, but his body wouldn't obey. He could feel the frozen tears on his eyelashes as the wind continued to howl around him, indifferent to his suffering. Noah's mind began to oscillate between panic and exhaustion. Every breath was a monumental effort, and he knew he didn't have much time left. "If I close my eyes now, I'll never open them again," he thought, his determination trying to stay alive amidst the terror. But the cold was relentless, and he could feel his strength ebbing away, as if he was slipping into a sleep from which there was no return. The houses remained illuminated, full of life and warmth, but no one looked outside. No one noticed the small figure being consumed by the snow in the middle of the night. For them, it was just another Christmas night, full of joy and celebration. For Noah, it was a desperate battle for survival, waged in complete silence and solitude. As his thoughts began to cloud and consciousness threatened to abandon him, one last idea emerged in his mind. "I don't want to disappear like this. Someone, please, save me." Suddenly, a different sound cut through the silence of the night. Soft footsteps in the snow, each one accompanied by the rustling of a heavy cloak. The sound slowly approached, and even with his faltering consciousness, Noah realized that someone was there. His mind tried to scream for help, but his body remained motionless. He felt the snowflakes being brushed from his face by warm, delicate hands. Something was different. "Oh my God, you're alive," said a soft, urgent female voice. She knelt beside Noah, leaning over him. Her presence emanated warmth, something that contrasted with the biting cold of the snow. The woman had piercing eyes, full of concern, and her face partially hidden by the hood of a heavy coat. "Can you hear me? Are you hearing me?" Noah tried to respond, but his mouth wouldn't move. He wanted to scream, to cry, to say that he needed help, but all he could muster was a faint, almost inaudible sound. However, it was enough. The woman leaned closer, her eyes catching the small movement of his frozen lips. "You're trying to speak," she murmured, her tone a mix of relief and urgency. "Don't worry, little one. I'm here. I'll get you out of here." She began brushing the snow away from around him with her hands, trying to free the frail body that was almost completely buried. Noah blinked slowly, trying to stay awake. He didn't know who she was, but her voice was like a ray of light in the darkness. He knew he couldn't give up now. With all the effort he had left, he moved his eyes, looking directly at her, trying to convey what he couldn't say with words. "You're strong, I know it," said the woman, with a conviction that seemed to pierce through the layer of ice that enveloped him. "I won't leave you here. Hold on tight." She placed her hands under his shoulders, trying to lift him. "That's so cold," she murmured to herself, feeling the almost unbearable weight of the boy's rigid body. "You're frozen, but I won't give up on you." As she lifted him with difficulty, Noah felt a wave of warmth around his body, as if her mere presence pushed away some of the deadly cold that consumed him. He didn't know who this woman was or why she was there, but for the first time since waking up in the snow, he felt a glimmer of hope. The woman adjusted her cloak around Noah, carefully covering him. "I'll take you somewhere safe," she promised, her voice firm but full of tenderness. "You'll be all right, little one, I guarantee it." As she began walking through the snow, carrying the boy in her arms, Noah felt his consciousness start to waver again. But now, he wasn't afraid anymore. Even without knowing who this woman was, he trusted her. Somehow he knew she wouldn't leave him alone. The woman walked briskly through the snow, holding Noah in her arms as carefully as possible. Her breathing was heavy, each step sinking into the thick white layer, but her determination was unwavering. She looked at the boy in her arms, his face pale and almost lifeless, and pulled the coat tighter around him to try to keep him warm. "You'll be all right, I promise," she whispered, as if those words could protect him from the cold and the fear. Finally, the lights of a small hospital appeared on the horizon. It was a simple building, but bright and welcoming in contrast to the icy darkness of the night. The woman pushed through the glass doors with her shoulder, her voice ringing out firm and urgent. "Please, I need help. It's a boy. He's in really bad shape." Immediately, a nurse came running, followed by 2 doctors who were on duty. When their eyes fell on Noah's motionless body, they all froze for a moment, shocked by his condition. "My God, he's in critical condition," said one of the doctors, his voice grave. "Bring a stretcher now." The woman gently placed Noah on the stretcher that was quickly brought. "He was in the snow for a long time," she explained, her voice still breathless. "I found him almost completely buried. He was paralyzed but still breathing." The doctors exchanged quick glances, their expressions serious. "We need to stabilize him immediately," said another doctor as they began pushing the stretcher down the hallway. "Severe hypothermia, risk of multiple organ failure. He'll need full workups now." The woman tried to follow them, but one of the nurses gently placed a hand on her shoulder, blocking her path. "Ma'am, we need you to wait here. We'll do everything we can for him." She nodded reluctantly, watching as they took Noah away. The hallway seemed to close in around her, and the sound of footsteps and the stretcher faded quickly. She sat down in a nearby chair, her shoulders slumped, but her gaze remained steady. "He'll be all right," she murmured to herself, clutching her coat tightly as if trying to convince herself of her own words. Meanwhile, Noah was taken to the emergency room, where the medical team worked frantically. He was hooked up to monitors, and the room filled with the sounds of machines recording his vital signs. "Blood pressure is dangerously low," said a nurse, adjusting the oxygen tubes. "Let's do a CT scan and blood tests now," ordered the doctor. "We need to assess the extent of the damage caused by the cold exposure." Noah, still unconscious, looked frail under the bright lights of the room. As they took him for the exams, a doctor mumbled softly to himself, "He was lucky someone found him in time." The team carefully positioned him for the first scan, everyone's eyes fixed on the monitor as the images began to appear. "The organs seem to have resisted better than we expected," said one of the doctors with a tone of relief. "But he's still in critical condition. We need to keep him warm and hydrated. Hypothermia has caused severe damage to the nervous system." As the exams continued outside, the woman waited, her hands clasped as if silently praying. She knew that night was crucial for the boy and that everything would depend on the next moments. The clock struck midnight, but for her, time seemed to stand still. After hours of exams and procedures, the doctor emerged from the emergency room with a grave expression, but also a slight relief in his eyes. He found the woman in the hallway still sitting in the chair, her shoulders tense and her gaze fixed on the door through which Noah had disappeared. When she noticed the doctor approaching, she quickly stood up. "How is he?" she asked, her voice charged with anxiety. The doctor took a deep breath before answering. "He's alive, thanks to you. If you hadn't found him and brought him here, he would have died from the cold. The exposure was severe, but we managed to stabilize him. However, we found something in the tests that needs to be explained." The woman frowned, the concern on her face increasing. "What is it? He's going to be okay, isn't he?" The doctor nodded slowly, choosing his words carefully. "Yes, he will recover, but we found signs of a toxin in his system, something that causes temporary paralysis. That's why he couldn't move. This toxin is dangerous, and combined with the extreme cold, it put his life at risk. We're still monitoring his vital signs, but we need to wait for the effect of the toxin to fully pass." The woman looked confused, but also alarmed. "A toxin? How could something like that happen? Was it accidental?" The doctor shook his head, crossing his arms. "It's hard to say for sure at this point, but it doesn't seem accidental. He was exposed to a significant dose. Whoever did this probably knew the effects it would cause." The woman felt a chill, but not from the outside cold. It was the kind of feeling that came from realizing that something much bigger and more dangerous was at stake. She looked at the doctor, her voice trembling slightly. So he was poisoned and left to die. Unfortunately, that's what it seems, the doctor confirmed, his expression somber. If he hadn't been rescued in time, the combination of poisoning and hypothermia would have been fatal. His body is fighting, but he's strong. We'll keep monitoring, but I believe he has a good chance of a full recovery. The woman took a deep breath, trying to process the information. She looked at the floor for a moment before raising her gaze with determination. He is strong, yes, stronger than anyone thinks. He'll survive, no matter what happens. The doctor gave a small smile, admiring her determination. What he needs now is rest and time for his body to fully eliminate the toxin. We'll take good care of him. And if you know anything that might help the investigation, don't hesitate to let us know. The woman nodded, thanking the doctor. Then she sat down again, her eyes fixed on the emergency room door. She knew there was much more to be revealed about what had happened to Noah, but for now the important thing was that he was alive, and thanks to her, he still had a chance to fight for a future. Meanwhile, in a dark, luxurious lounge, Harrison was seated at the head of a long, solid wood table. The dim light from the lamps above partially illuminated his face, revealing a cold, calculating expression. Around the table were other men, all impeccably dressed with an air of authority and power. Yet there was something sinister about the gathering, a tension that hung in the air like an invisible shadow. One of the men, with carefully combed grey hair, rose and tossed a thick envelope across the table, which slid to a stop in front of Harrison. The sound of impact echoed through the silent room. "Here's the rest of the payment as agreed," said the man, his voice low but dripping with contempt. "You did your part. You left the boy to die in the snow. Nothing else matters now." Harrison picked up the envelope calmly, showing no emotion. He opened it, briefly glancing at the contents. It was an absurd amount of money even for someone like him who was already a millionaire. Closing the envelope, he slipped it into his coat's inside pocket and folded his arms, as if it were just another business transaction. "I hope this concludes our relationship," Harrison said, his voice cold. "I've fulfilled my end of the deal. I want no further involvement in this matter." The grey-haired man laughed sarcastically, leaning slightly over the table. "You think it's that simple? You may be rich, Harrison, but you're not above everything. Remember, you agreed to this because you know your fortune isn't eternal. Greed is your weakness, and that's why you agreed to let your own son die, just because I offered you a tempting sum." Harrison narrowed his eyes but didn't respond immediately. He knew the man's words were true, but he didn't care. To him, Noah was nothing but a burden, and his death had been an opportunity to rid himself of problems and profit from it at the same time. Life had always been a matter of survival, and Harrison believed that money was the only way to win. Another man seated across the table broke the silence. "You really are a man without scruples, Harrison, agreeing to take money to abandon your own son, all because one of us here couldn't stand his mother. I confess it's more than I even expected from you." Harrison gave a bitter smile. "I did what was necessary. Sentimentality doesn't interest me. You paid me to solve a problem, and the problem was solved. Don't come moralizing now." The grey-haired man took a step back, folding his arms with an air of superiority before slowly sitting down. His voice carried a tone of warning, cold and calculated. "Indeed, you fulfilled your part, Harrison. But remember one thing. To the world, you're just another rich man. And rich men, no matter how much they think otherwise, always have something to lose." His words hung in the air like a poison that took time to take effect, but was impossible to ignore. Harrison let out a low laugh, more like a scornful grunt. His impassive eyes swept over the faces of the men around him. "Something to lose?" he repeated, adjusting his coat with slow, deliberate movements. "You're mistaken if you think you can intimidate me with those words." He straightened his posture, with the air of a man who believed he was in absolute control. "We're done here. If you need anything else, you know how to find me, but I'm warning you, my patience has limits." Without waiting for a response, Harrison spun on his heels and left the room, his boots echoing through the marble-lined corridors. The sound of his footsteps was rhythmic and heavy, a reflection of his unwavering confidence. He knew he had crossed a line, but for him, it was all part of the game. a game where only the strongest and most ambitious survived. As he advanced through the silent hallways, Harrison did not allow any trace of doubt to arise in his mind. He was a man driven by money and power, and he believed that with these two weapons, he could control any situation. What was a boy compared to his growing fortune? He had done what he considered necessary, and nothing else mattered. When he finally reached the parking lot, the cold night wind did not make him hesitate. He got into his luxurious car, an imposing machine that reflected his personality, and slammed the door shut. As he turned the key in the ignition, the graying man's voice continued to echo in his mind. Rich men always have something to lose. Harrison snorted, lighting a cigar as the car came to life. The thick smoke filled the inside of the vehicle, and he took a long drag, his thoughts mingled with contempt and self-confidence. "They don't know what they're talking about," he muttered to himself with an arrogant smile. "I have nothing to lose, nothing that really matters." But as he accelerated down the deserted road, the city lights in the distance illuminating the horizon, the words seemed to gain a weight he didn't want to admit. Always have something to lose. He tried to brush off the discomfort with another drag of the cigar, but for the first time, a small flicker of doubt crossed his mind. However, Harrison quickly shook his head, rejecting any thought that could threaten his vision of himself as invulnerable. He had money, he had power, and he believed that put him above any consequence. For him, everything and everyone had a price. As he drove through the night, the sound of the engine echoing on the empty road, he had no idea that fate was plotting a blow that not even his money could prevent. The world he had built on greed and betrayal was about to crumble, and Harrison, blinded by his own arrogance, did not see that true loss was already on its way. 5 days had passed since Noah was found in the snow, and the hospital with its white walls and sterile atmosphere had become an unlikely refuge for him. The effect of the toxin in his body was beginning to fade, and finally he could move his fingers, his arms, and even his legs. But with the return of movement came memories of paralysis, helplessness, the cold snow covering his body as he struggled not to disappear. In the hospital bed, Noah slowly moved his hands, gripping the sheet tightly. His eyes began to fill with tears as the memories came back in full force. I thought I would never get out of there," he said, his voice broken by sobs. He covered his face with his small hands, as if he wanted to hide from himself the despair he felt. It was so cold, so dark. No one could hear me. On the other side of the room, Ruby, the woman who had saved him, approached slowly. Her steps were calm, but her presence was firm, like someone who knew how to deal with pain and fear. She sat on the edge of the bed, placing a comforting hand on Noah's shoulder. "Hey, little one," she said, her voice soft but filled with determination. "You went through something very difficult, but it's over. You made it. You're here, alive, and that's all that matters now." Noah slowly lowered his hands, looking at Ruby with red, tear-filled eyes. "But I couldn't move. I was trapped in my own body, and my father left me there. He abandoned me." His voice failed and he lowered his head, feeling the pain of being betrayed by someone who was supposed to protect him. Ruby took a deep breath, searching for the right words. "What you went through was horrible, Noah, and I'm sorry you had to face that, but know this. You're not alone now. You are stronger than you think. You survived something that many wouldn't be able to, and that shows how special you are." She leaned in slightly, looking directly into his eyes. "I'm here to take care of you if you let me. You deserve to be cared for, loved, and live a life that is yours, without fear, without pain." Noah blinked a few times as if trying to absorb her words. "You want to take care of me?" he asked, his voice timid, almost as if he was afraid to believe the kindness being offered. Ruby nodded, her gaze full of sincerity. "Yes, I do. I can't change what happened, but I can make sure you never go through anything like that again. You deserve someone who will be by your side, who will protect you and give you a chance to be happy." The boy looked at her, his face still stained with tears, but something in his eyes began to change. Mistrust gave way to a small flicker of hope, something he hadn't felt in a long time. "Do you promise I won't be alone again?" he asked, his voice choked but full of a vulnerability that broke the heart. Ruby smiled, a smile full of affection and determination. "I promise, Noah. No matter what happens, I'll be here. You don't have to carry this weight alone anymore." She gently pulled him into an embrace, and Noah, hesitant at first, finally relaxed, leaning his head on her shoulder. He cried softly, letting out all the fear and pain that had accumulated in his little heart. At that moment, for the first time in a long while, he felt that maybe he could trust someone again. As Ruby hugged him, her thoughts were clear. She would do everything in her power to ensure that this boy had a new chance, a life where he could grow up without fear, surrounded by love and security. To Ruby, Noah was not just a lost boy. He was a beginning, an opportunity to do something truly meaningful. And in that hospital room, surrounded by white walls and a welcoming silence, they both took the first step towards a better future. After a few more days in the hospital, the time finally came for Noah to leave that cold, impersonal environment behind. Ruby was by his side, holding his small suitcase as she helped him down the entrance steps. "Ready to go home?" she asked with an encouraging smile. Noah looked at her with a small nod, but there was something in his eyes that showed the mixture of relief and uncertainty he felt. He didn't know what to expect from that home, but anything seemed better than the place he had come from. They walked together through the streets to a small house at the end of a quiet road. It was a simple building, with worn brick walls and a roof that creaked slightly in the wind. A small front garden was filled with herbs and a few flowers that bravely resisted the cold. "This is it," said Ruby, as she unlocked the door with a gentle smile. "It's nothing grand, but it's cozy and safe. I'm sure you'll like it." Noah entered slowly, looking around. The interior was modest but welcoming. A worn fabric sofa occupied the living room, next to a coffee table with marks of use. On the shelves, books and small decorative objects were arranged in a way that seemed to tell stories of a simple yet meaningful life. The smell of something homemade, probably soup, still lingered in the air, making the environment even more inviting. "It's small," Noah commented, looking at each detail carefully. "But it's comfortable. I feel good here." He gave a small smile, a rare occurrence since the day he was rescued. "You know, I was used to luxury. My home was huge, full of expensive things, but it never felt this cozy. I think I like it here better." Ruby, who was hanging up her coat, looked at him with affection. "What makes a place a home isn't the size or luxury, Noah. It's the people and the feelings you put into it. Here, you don't have to be anything but yourself. That's what matters." Noah nodded, still exploring the small space with curiosity. He approached one of the shelves and picked up a picture frame with a simple and calm landscape. "Have you lived here for a long time?" he asked, trying to better understand Ruby's life. "It's been a few years," Ruby replied as she began tidying up some things in the kitchen. "It's not much, but it's my haven, a place where I can find peace, even on difficult days. Now I want it to be a haven for you too, Noah." Noah put the picture frame back, feeling a little more connected to this new reality. But there was something still weighing on his mind. He turned to Ruby, hesitant. "And my father?" he asked, his voice laden with a mix of fear and uncertainty. "What's going to happen to him?" Ruby sighed, approaching him and placing a hand on his shoulder. "Noah, tomorrow we're going to the police station. We need to report what he did to you. He can't continue with impunity." "I know it will be difficult, but you're not alone. I'll be with you the whole time." Noah swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words. Reporting his father seemed scary, but he knew it was the right thing to do. "Okay," he replied with a determined nod. "If it means he won't hurt anyone else, I'll do it." Ruby smiled and ruffled his hair affectionately. "You're a very brave boy, Noah. I know it will all work out." That night, as Noah settled into a simple yet warm and comfortable bed, he looked up at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had happened. For the first time in a long time, he felt that maybe he was safe. And despite the fear of what the future might bring, a small spark of hope began to grow in his heart. The next morning, Ruby and Noah walked together to the local police station. The day was cold, and the grey sky seemed to reflect the weight both felt in their hearts. Noah held Ruby's hand tightly, his little fingers trembling, but he didn't know if it was from the cold or nervousness. The police station building seemed intimidating to the boy, with its constant movement of people coming and going, busy officers, and the sound of phones ringing non-stop. Ruby guided him to the reception desk, where she quickly explained the situation to an officer. My name is Ruby and this is Noah. He needs to report something very serious." "His father tried to kill him," she said in a firm tone that contrasted with the usual softness of her voice. The officer looked at the boy and Ruby, nodding. "Follow me, please," he said, indicating a more private room. Inside, a detective with a serious expression awaited them, sitting behind a desk with a notepad in front of him. "You can sit down," said the detective, gesturing to the chairs in front of him. "My name is Detective Ruiz and I'll be handling your case." He looked at Noah with an expression that mixed concern and professionalism. "You can tell me what happened, boy. Don't be afraid. We're here to help you." Noah looked at Ruby, who squeezed his hand in support. He took a deep breath before starting to speak. "My father, he gave me something to drink, and then I passed out. When I woke up, I was in the snow. I couldn't move. He left me there. He said the world had no place for the weak. He wanted me to die." His voice was weak but full of emotion. The words seemed to weigh heavier and heavier as they left his mouth. The detective listened attentively, taking notes. When Noah finished, Ruiz looked up at Ruby. "What you did was save his life. The condition he was in, the description of the toxin. All of this is extremely serious. We'll start an investigation immediately." The day was long, with the police station in constant motion. Officers went out to gather clues, ask questions in the neighborhood, and check Harrison's history. Meanwhile, Ruby and Noah waited in the private room, the boy trying to keep himself occupied with improvised drawings that Ruby had brought to distract him. When the clock struck the end of the afternoon, Detective Ruiz returned to the room, his expression serious, but with a spark of progress in his eyes. He pulled up a chair and sat in front of them. "We found some important information," he said. "First, we discovered that Harrison was already involved in several suspicious activities. Irregular financial transactions, meetings with people of dubious character. All of this had been accumulating for some time." Ruby leaned forward, concerned. "And about what he did to Noah? Can that be proven?" Ruiz nodded. "We are gathering evidence. We spoke with some neighbors who confirmed seeing strange movements at his house on the night the boy disappeared. Additionally, we have medical records showing the toxin in Noah's body, which corroborates his story. We're connecting the dots." Noah looked at the detective with a mixture of hope and fear. "Will you find him?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. Ruiz paused, his tone softer. "We'll do everything we can, Noah, but your father is missing. He ran away, and we now have a search warrant to locate him. It may take time, but we won't give up." Ruby put a hand on Noah's shoulder, trying to comfort him. "The important thing is that you're safe now. They'll find him sooner or later." The detective looked at both of them seriously. "You need to stay alert. I don't think he'd try anything again, but it's always good to be prepared. We'll keep you informed of any new developments. And Noah," he said, turning to the boy, "you were very brave today. Telling your story helps more than you can imagine." While leaving the police station, the sky was beginning to darken, and the streetlights illuminated the way back home. Noah held Ruby's hand tightly, the weight of the day still present, but with a different feeling growing inside him. For the first time, he felt that he was not alone. The next day, the sound of the doorbell woke Ruby and Noah from their quiet routine. Ruby opened the door, finding Detective Ruiz with a tired but still determined expression. He was holding a folder of documents and politely gestured to come in. "We need to talk," he said, with a tone that already made it clear that the news would not be easy to hear. Ruby led the detective into the small living room, where Noah was already sitting on the sofa, watching the scene with attentive eyes. Ruiz placed the folder on the coffee table and sat in one of the nearby chairs. He sighed before beginning. "We managed to track Harrison's whereabouts," he said, looking directly at Noah. "He fled the country. He used connections to leave discreetly, and for now is out of our direct reach." Noah felt a tightness in his chest. The idea that his father, the man who had abandoned him to die, was now beyond the reach of justice made him feel a mixture of anger and helplessness. "And now?" he asked, his voice small but full of concern. "Will he come back? Can he find me?" Ruiz shook his head, trying to calm the boy. "For now, there is no indication that he will try to come back. We are working with international agencies to locate him, but these processes can take time. In the meantime, I want you to know that you are safe here. He cannot hurt you again. Ruby squeezed Noah's hand, a silent gesture of support. "Thank you, Detective," she said. "We will do our best to keep Noah protected and with a normal life." Ruiz nodded, standing up. "If you need anything, get in touch. We won't give up on this case." He gave Noah a small, encouraging smile before leaving the house in a heavy silence. After the door closed, Noah looked at Ruby, his eyes still full of questions. "So, he's away now?" he asked, trying to find some security in the situation. Ruby nodded, stroking his hair. "Yes, he's far away. And I'm here to make sure you stay safe. Let's focus on you, Noah, on your life, your future. He can no longer control you." Noah took a deep breath, feeling a little lighter. After a few minutes of silence, he looked at Ruby with curiosity. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure," she replied, sitting beside him. "Why were you walking alone on Christmas night?" he asked, his voice hesitant. "Don't you have anyone?" Ruby paused for a moment, her gaze lost in memories. "No," she replied with a wistful smile. "I don't have anyone. My parents have been gone for a long time, and I've never had a family of my own. At Christmas, I like to go out and help those in need, because I think no one should be alone or suffering at this time of year." Noah looked at her, feeling a wave of empathy. "But you found me," he said with a small smile, "and now you have someone." Ruby laughed softly, pulling Noah into an embrace. "You're right, Noah. Now I have you. And together, we'll create our own traditions, our own home." Noah closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of her embrace. For the first time, the weight of his life seemed to start to dissipate. He knew that Ruby's presence was more than protection. It was the chance for a new beginning, a new life where he could finally be happy. "Thank you, Ruby," he whispered, "for everything." "You don't need to thank me," she replied, her heart full of affection. "We're in this together, Noah. Always." A year passed and they grew closer. But Noah couldn't shake the image of his father from his life. Whether he wanted to or not, he was his father, and that made him pull away a little from Ruby, but he always tried to be with her. One day the sky was clear, and the cold seemed to have given a truce. Ruby and Noah decided to take advantage of the day to go to the supermarket and buy some things for home. Noah, still getting used to his new routine, seemed excited. He ran between the aisles looking at the products with curiosity and choosing his favorite items with the enthusiasm of a child who finally felt safe. "Can I get this cereal?" he asked, holding a colorful box that promised prizes. Ruby smiled. "Sure, but only if you also grab something healthy to balance it out," she teased, pointing towards the nearby fruits. Noah laughed, darting to the fruit section to grab some bananas. Everything seemed calm and light, as if the weight of the past few weeks had dissipated a little. But as they stood in the checkout line, something shifted. Ruby was placing the items on the counter when her eyes drifted to a figure passing by the adjacent aisle. Her smile vanished, and her posture stiffened, as if she had seen something that froze her in place. It was a gray-haired man, dressed simply but with a presence that seemed to dominate the space around him. He paused for a moment, grabbing something from the shelf, but as he looked up, his eyes met Ruby's. Both stood motionless as if time had stopped. The man seemed as startled as she was, and his gaze held something indecipherable: shock, recognition, perhaps even remorse. Noah, sensing the sudden silence, looked at Ruby, and then at the man who still stood frozen in the aisle. "Ruby, do you know him?" Noah asked, his voice breaking the tense atmosphere, though it carried a childlike tone of concern. Ruby didn't respond immediately. Her eyes were locked on the man as if time had halted. Her expression wavered between surprise and something deeper, a mixture of emotions Noah had never seen before. The man, too, seemed unable to look away. His shoulders were tense, and his breathing, even from a distance, seemed heavy. Finally, Ruby drew a deep breath, averting her gaze as if to break that silent tether. She looked at Noah, her face laden with a seriousness he didn't fully comprehend. "Let's finish up here and go home, Noah," she said, her voice quieter than usual but with an attempted steadiness. Yet, there was an evident tremor to her words that didn't go unnoticed by him. Noah frowned, puzzled, but decided not to question it at that moment. He picked up some of the groceries and placed them in the cart, noticing that Ruby was more distracted than ever. She didn't check the prices or scan the items like she usually did. Instead, her gaze kept darting back to where the man was standing. It seemed as if she wanted to make sure he wasn't following them, but at the same time, there was something in her look that hinted that maybe she wished she understood why he was there. As they finally made their way through the checkout and out of the supermarket, the chill outside seemed more intense than before. Noah, clutching Ruby's coat sleeve, who had gone unusually quiet, couldn't contain his curiosity any longer. "Who was that man, Ruby?" he asked again, his voice now firmer, though still carrying the innocence of a boy who just wanted to understand what was happening. Ruby paused for a moment, drawing a deep breath before looking at him. "Someone I didn't expect to see," she said, squeezing his hand lightly. But her gaze quickly drifted, and Noah knew there was more to that answer than she was willing to admit. "Let's go home. It's all right now," she added, trying to reassure him, but her voice had a nervous edge that made it all seem less convincing. On the way back, Noah remained silent, but his eyes watched Ruby attentively. He noticed how she seemed lost in thought, her eyes fixed on the path ahead but not really seeing. It was as if she was trying to sort through something in her mind, something she didn't want to share, at least not yet. The silence between them was heavy, almost palpable, as if the air around them was charged with unanswered questions. As they walked along the quiet streets, Noah finally broke the silence again. "You're worried about him, aren't you?" he asked, with the honesty and curiosity typical of a child. "Did he do something to you?" Ruby stopped in her tracks, turning to look at him. Her eyes were softer now, but there was still something guarded behind them, something she was clearly struggling to keep hidden. "Noah," she began, carefully choosing her words. "Sometimes people come into our lives in unexpected ways, but we're not always ready to deal with it. I just want you to know that no matter what happens, I'm here for you, and that's what matters right now." Noah nodded slowly, but the mystery continued to nag at him. He glanced back towards the supermarket, now out of sight, wondering who that man was and why he seemed to have such an impact on Ruby. As they walked the remaining distance to their home, he realized the questions in his mind wouldn't be answered anytime soon. Ruby opened the door and let Noah enter first. She placed the groceries on the table, but remained standing, gazing out the window for a moment before drawing the curtains shut. Noah watched her attentively, sensing that something bigger was happening. And as he settled on the couch, the curiosity and concern continued to grow within him. Who was that man? And why did he seem to shift everything around him? The day dragged on slowly, each hour seeming to linger longer than the last. Ruby, usually busy with her tasks, was restless. Every few minutes she would cast furtive glances towards the window, as if expecting, or dreading, something. Her expression was a mix of worry and tension, something Noah couldn't ignore. "Is everything okay, Ruby?" he asked at one point, as he played with a book on the table. "Yes, Noah, everything's okay," she responded quickly, without meeting his gaze. Her voice was rushed, almost evasive. She adjusted a curtain that was already perfectly arranged and looked back out at the street, where darkness was starting to settle in. Noah frowned. He knew Ruby well enough to know that something was deeply troubling her. But instead of pressuring her, he decided to wait. He also couldn't get the man from the supermarket out of his head, and the impact he seemed to have had on Ruby. The silence in the house, which used to be comforting, now felt heavy and unsettling. Elsewhere, the clock struck precisely 3 in the afternoon when the doorbell rang at Harrison's luxurious hideaway. The sound echoed through the marble-decorated corridors and gleaming chandeliers, an environment that exuded wealth and opulence. Harrison, seated in his leather armchair with a cigar in one hand and a glass of whiskey in the other, frowned. He wasn't expecting anyone. "Who could that be now?" he muttered, rising with a certain laziness. He walked to the door, his firm steps echoing on the cold floor, and opened just a crack to peek out. A uniformed delivery man was on the other side, holding a medium-sized package wrapped in discreet paper with a black ribbon on top. "Mr. Harrison, delivery for you, sir," the man announced in a monotone voice. Harrison hesitated for a moment before opening the door fully. He took the package without saying a word, closing the door at the same speed he had opened it. He analyzed the box for an instant, as if trying to decipher what was inside without having to open it. There was something strange, a feeling of unease he couldn't explain. Returning to the armchair, he placed the package on the coffee table and snuffed out the cigar in the ashtray. He carefully untied the black ribbon and then opened the lid. Inside, wrapped in yellowed tissue paper, was a photograph. He held the image with trembling hands, and his heart seemed to stop for an instant. It was a photo of Noah and Ruby. They were together, smiling, seemingly carefree. The background of the photo showed what appeared to be a small house with Christmas lights. Harrison's eyes widened, unable to look away from the image. The memory of Ruby, whom he had forced to abandon her own son, and Noah, whom he had tried to kill for money, now stared back at him like a ghost from the past. "No, this can't be possible," he muttered, sweat beginning to trickle down his forehead. His hands started to shake even more when he noticed an envelope at the bottom of the box. He pulled out the letter and opened it hastily, his hands shaking so much he almost tore the paper. The message was handwritten in a firm, elegant script. "Harrison, I warned you there were things you couldn't control, but you never listened. You failed to finish the job, and now it's all come back to haunt you. The boy you tried to kill is alive, and Ruby is stronger than ever. But don't worry, I'll take care of it myself tonight. Keep this Christmas present. Gather everyone. Regards, Morgan." Harrison let the letter drop to the floor, the air seeming to escape from his lungs. He ran his hand over his sweaty face, feeling the weight of the threat in the words. "This can't be happening," he whispered to himself. "I did everything he asked. How is he still alive?" Fear began to take hold of his mind. He knew who had sent the letter. Morgan, the graying man who was as relentless as he was calculating. Morgan never made empty promises, and if he had decided to act, there was no doubt something terrible was about to happen. Harrison stood up abruptly, knocking the whiskey glass to the floor, but he didn't care. He picked up his phone and began dialing frantically, calling the other members of the organization. "Gather here immediately," he ordered, his voice trembling. "We have a problem, and it's serious." He hung up the phone and began pacing back and forth in the room, his hands clutching the photo of Noah and Ruby as if it were a reminder of his failure. He knew Morgan was dangerous, but underestimating him had been his biggest mistake. Now, with that threatening letter and the weight of the past approaching like a storm, Harrison felt the ground beginning to crumble beneath his feet. He looked at the photo again, his teeth clenched in anger and fear. "This can't end like this," he muttered to himself, trying to regain control of his thoughts. But deep down he knew the night promised to be long, and none of those involved would come out unscathed. At least she dies today. Back at Ruby's house, the night fell quickly, bringing with it a cold wind that made the windows tremble. Noah was in his room trying to distract himself with drawings, but Ruby's restlessness seemed to have contaminated the environment. He lay down on the bed but couldn't sleep. The silence of the house was interrupted only by the occasional sound of Ruby pacing back and forth. Suddenly, the sound of knocks on the door echoed through the house, shattering the tranquility of the night. It was a loud and insistent sound, making Noah's heart race. He sat up in bed immediately, his eyes wide towards the bedroom door. For a moment he was paralyzed, hearing the knocks echo again, this time louder. In the living room, Ruby froze midway, looking at the door with an expression that mixed fear and determination. She took a deep breath, but didn't move immediately. Outside, the knocks continued, each time more intense, echoing through the house like a silent threat. Noah, still in the room, felt a chill run down his spine. He wanted to run to the living room to see who was there, but something held him back. He knew that Ruby's world was full of secrets, and now it seemed that one of them was knocking on the door. Ruby hesitated for a moment before finally opening the door. Her hands were trembling, but her gaze was firm, as if she already knew who would be on the other side. And there he was, the grey-haired man they had met at the supermarket. His eyes carried a threatening intensity, and his presence seemed to dominate the environment. He took a step forward, approaching her with an expression of contained fury. "Stay quiet," he said in a low tone but full of threat, raising a finger towards her. "Don't say a word, Ruby. I've waited too long for this. You think you can run away, leave me behind, and just disappear as if nothing happened?" Ruby took a step back, her body rigid like a statue. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice almost inaudible, but laden with determination. The man laughed, but there was no humor in his laugh. "You know what I want. I've been looking for you for years, Ruby. For years. And when I finally found out what you did, marrying that worthless Harrison, trading everything we had for him, that was an insult I'll never forgive." Ruby closed her eyes for a moment, trying to recompose herself, but her voice failed to respond. I did what I had to do. You were a monster. I couldn't stay. The mention of Harrison's name made Noah's heart stop for an instant. He was hidden behind the hallway door, listening to every word. His small world, already so full of uncertainties, seemed to collapse again. If Ruby was talking about Harrison, then that meant it couldn't be. But all the pieces started to fit together. The woman who had saved him, who had promised to protect him, could be his mother. Noah instinctively backed away. The floor beneath his feet seemed to dissolve. He covered his mouth with his hands, trying to muffle any sound that might escape, but his mind was in chaos. Meanwhile, in the living room, the gray-haired man took another step forward, narrowing his eyes. You thought you could hide from me forever, Ruby. Well, here I am, and now you're going to listen to me. The tension in the air was palpable, each word laden with weight and mystery. And while Ruby faced that man, Noah, hidden, felt that his life was about to change in a way he could never have imagined. Ruby took a deep breath, trying to stay calm in the face of Morgan's fury. Her gaze was fixed on him, but her body trembled slightly, as if the weight of years of pain and secrets was finally coming to the surface. Harrison wasn't the man you think he was, she said, her voice firmer than before. He was as bad as you. He manipulated me, controlled me, and made me stay away from my own son. I never wanted that. I never wanted to lose my boy. Morgan laughed bitterly, a cold laugh that echoed through the room. Oh, of course. The blame is never yours, is it, Ruby? You've always had a way of blaming others for your choices. He took a step forward, pointing his finger at her with intensity. You chose to abandon me. You chose that miserable Harrison. Everything that happened after is your fault, Ruby. Yours. Ruby's eyes shone with tears, but she refused to give in. I did what I had to do to survive, Morgan. You'll never understand, because you never cared about anyone but yourself. Her voice trembled, but there was a strength behind her words, a strength that came from years of suffering and struggle. As the argument intensified, Noah, still hidden behind the hallway door, watched everything through the crack. His heart was racing and his mind was a whirlwind. Ruby's words echoed in his head, made me stay away from my own son. He tried to process what he was hearing, but the truth seemed too big to comprehend all at once. Suddenly Morgan, in the midst of his rage, turned abruptly, as if he had sensed something. His eyes scanned the room until they fixed on the crack of the door where Noah was hiding. His eyes narrowed, and his face hardened even more as he noticed the little observer. Ruby, noticing the change in Morgan's expression, followed his gaze and felt her heart stop for an instant. Noah, she murmured, with a mixture of alarm and despair as the boy's presence brought a new weight to the situation. The silence that followed was suffocating, charged with tension. Morgan stared intently at the crack, as if he could pierce through the door with his gaze, and Noah, paralyzed, knew he could not hide much longer. Morgan took a step forward, pointing his finger in Noah's direction, his expression laden with contempt and coldness. That boy should be dead, he said in a low voice but filled with venom. I paid that coward Harrison to finish the job. To poison him, leave him to die in the snow, to get my revenge on you. And here he is, alive. It seems I can't trust anyone to do things right. Ruby stood paralyzed, her face paling as Morgan's words echoed through the room. She brought her hand to her mouth, trying to process what she had just heard. You tried to kill my son? Her voice was a whisper, almost inaudible but charged with disbelief. Tears began to well up in her eyes, but a flame of fury was quickly growing within her. How could you, Morgan? How could you do something so monstrous? Noah, still hidden in the crack, felt the ground disappear from under his feet. The shock of Morgan's words was almost unbearable. He looked at Ruby, trying to find answers in her face, but all he saw was pain. So it's true, he thought, his heart heavy. She is my mother. But why didn't she ever tell me? Morgan scoffed, shrugging as if what he had confessed was insignificant. Why did I do it? Because you deserved it, Ruby. You betrayed me. You left me for Harrison, and when I found out you had a son, I realized I could use that against you. He was just a tool, a way to make sure you suffered for the rest of your life. Ruby took a step forward, her eyes filled with tears, but also with a fierce determination. Her voice, though trembling, cut through the silence like a sharp blade. You're a monster, Morgan. All you do is destroy lives. You've destroyed so much, caused so much pain, but you won't get to do it again. Not with my son. I should have known you'd still be obsessed with revenge, unable to move on, unable to be anything but a shadow of what a man should be. Morgan raised his eyebrows, surprised by her courage, but soon the surprise gave way to a cruel smile. He took a step towards Ruby, the tension in the air becoming almost tangible. "You think you can stand up to me, Ruby?" he asked, his voice low and full of venom. "You think you can stop me now? You were always so naive. Don't you see you've already won this battle in your head? But in reality, the only person in control here is me." He paused, the smile on his lips widening, an expression of perverse triumph. "You think this is all? Now that you know everything, you and that boy will have to die. In fact," he paused again, leaning slightly towards her as if sharing a perverse secret, "I knew I'd do this from the moment I saw you in that grocery store. It was always the plan." Morgan's words fell like thunder, filling the room with an emotional darkness that seemed to suffocate any hope. Ruby took a deep breath, her eyes quickly searching for the hallway door where Noah was hiding. She knew he could hear every word, that he could feel the threat, and it made her heart ache even more. How could she stop someone like Morgan from hurting her son again? How could she protect Noah, especially now that the truth had been revealed? Noah, on the other side of the door, felt his heart pounding so hard it seemed to echo in his ears. He wanted to scream, to run, to do something, but fear kept him immobile. The revelation that Morgan had planned his death was terrifying, but what truly consumed him was the discovery that Ruby was his mother. With every word from Morgan, he struggled to understand why she hadn't told him before. Why had she left him living in doubt for so long? Why hadn't she told the truth from the beginning? Meanwhile, Morgan continued advancing slowly, his presence dominating the environment. He seemed to savor the fear in Ruby's eyes, the way she was now calculating each move. "You think you can escape this?" he asked, tilting his head like a predator toying with its prey. "Do you think you'll get out of here alive with that boy? No matter what you do, Ruby, what started with your betrayal will end here, the way it should have ended all along." Ruby felt the tears streaming down her face, but her determination did not waver. She knew she was facing a dangerous man, a man who would not hesitate to carry out his threats. But behind all that menace and cruelty, there was something more: desperation. Morgan was not just a cruel man. He was a man consumed by his own hatred, someone who had lost everything and was now trying to destroy the little that was left around him. "I won't let you touch my son," she finally said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "You can hate me as much as you want, Morgan, but that's not going to give you the control you want. I've survived you before, and I'll survive again." Morgan laughed, but his eyes narrowed with anger. Before he could respond, something caught his attention. He noticed a subtle movement at the hallway door, his eyes immediately fixed on the crack, and his expression turned into something even more sinister. "What do we have here?" he said with a tone of sick satisfaction. "So the boy is listening. Good. It'll make things easier." Ruby felt her blood run cold as she realized Morgan had noticed Noah. She took a step towards him, positioning herself instinctively between Morgan and the hallway door. "Don't touch him," she said, her voice low but laden with authority. Noah, for his part, felt like the air around him had disappeared. He knew he had been discovered, and now the weight of the moment was almost unbearable. He didn't know what he would do, but one thing was certain: that moment would change their lives forever. Morgan quickly advanced, grabbing Ruby's arm with a force that made her gasp. "Enough talk," he growled, roughly pulling her towards the door. "You're coming with me, Ruby. We're going to settle this now, the way it should have been settled years ago." "Let me go, Morgan," Ruby shouted, trying to break free, but his strength was relentless. She struggled, trying to pull her arm back, but Morgan's uncontrolled rage made him even more dangerous. "You're acting like a madman! Let me go!" The shouts echoed through the house, and Noah, still hidden, felt his heart pounding. He wanted to help, to stop it, but fear paralyzed him. When he finally managed to move, he saw Morgan dragging Ruby out of the house, pushing her toward a parked car. "Ruby!" Noah shouted, running after them, but it was too late. Morgan opened the car door and practically threw Ruby into the passenger seat. He quickly got in and slammed the door shut. Noah ran to the car, trying to open the door or get Ruby's attention, but Morgan had already started the engine. "Stay away, kid!" Morgan yelled out the window as he peeled out at high speed. Noah tried to run after the vehicle, his small steps struggling against the weight of the snow that seemed to pull him back with every movement. "Ruby, don't go!" he shouted, his desperate voice cutting through the frozen silence of the night, but quickly swallowed by the roar of the engine and the biting wind. The tears streaming down his face froze on his skin, but he could barely feel the cold. All that mattered was catching up to them, stopping Morgan from taking her away. His legs burned with the effort and his lungs ached, struggling for air in the icy air. The snow was getting deeper, and he stumbled with every step, but he didn't stop. "Ruby!" he shouted again, his voice breaking from the strain. He could see the taillights of the car blinking as the vehicle moved farther and farther away. They seemed so close and yet impossibly out of reach. Finally exhausted, Noah tripped and fell to his knees in the snow. The coldness enveloped him instantly, but he didn't even try to get up. His eyes remained fixed on the horizon, where the car's lights had completely disappeared into the darkness. He let out a scream of frustration, the sound coming out as a desperate roar that echoed into the silent night. The sound seemed to carry all the pain and helplessness he felt at that moment. "I couldn't do it," he muttered to himself, his heavy breathing creating clouds of vapor in the cold air. The tears continued to stream down his face, but he made no move to wipe them away. "I should have done something. I should have stopped it." He lowered his head, clenching his fists in the snow, feeling small and weak in the face of the enormity of the situation. The snow was starting to accumulate on his shoulders and hair, the cold seeping into his bones. But Noah remained motionless, lost in his thoughts of guilt and despair. The memory of Ruby being dragged away by Morgan replayed in his mind like a nightmare he couldn't erase. Every word she said, every scream of resistance, echoed in his head, fueling his sense of failure. But then, in the midst of the emotional darkness, something shifted. As the chill of the night threatened to overcome him, a flame began to grow in his chest. It wasn't big, but it was enough to rekindle his strength. He thought of Ruby, of everything she had done for him, of the sacrifice she was making now. He thought about how she had rescued him from certain death, how she had given him a second chance at life. And in that moment, he knew he couldn't give up. "I won't let her go," he said, his voice low but firm as he raised his head. The words began to repeat in his mind like a mantra, a silent vow he made to himself. He felt his muscles, previously tense from exhaustion, begin to react. Trembling, he pushed his hands against the snow and slowly rose, his legs still wobbly but determined. As the wind continued to blow around him, Noah looked in the direction the car had disappeared, his gaze full of determination. He didn't know how, but he would find a way to bring Ruby back. He wouldn't let Morgan defeat them. He was no longer the frail boy who had been left to die in the snow. He was stronger now for her. With trembling but resolute steps, Noah began to walk back home. The night was colder than ever, but he felt a newfound strength within him, something that propelled him forward. "Ruby," he whispered to himself, his voice laden with hope and determination. "I'll find you, no matter what I have to do." When Noah finally arrived home, his legs were trembling and his body ached from the cold. He pushed the door open slowly, his heart still heavy with guilt and uncertainty about what to do next. The small house was silent, the air thick with an emptiness that seemed to swallow everything around it. Noah rubbed his hands against his arms, trying to warm up, but the feeling of helplessness was colder than the night wind. He took a few steps inside, and something on the floor caught his attention. Under the dim light coming in through the window, he saw a small object glinting near the table. He frowned and approached, kneeling to pick it up. It was a badge, with letters printed in black and a discreet logo in the corner. Noah turned the badge in his hands, reading the engraved name, Morgan Salazar, followed by a title he didn't recognize and the name of an organization, Sons of Wealth. His eyes widened, and he felt a chill run down his spine. He knew this didn't belong to Ruby. It could only have been left behind by Morgan before he took Ruby. But what did it mean? Who was Morgan, really? And what did this Orion Enterprises have to do with all of this? He looked around the room, trying to remember if he had seen that badge before, but he couldn't recall anything. His mind began working quickly, connecting the dots. If Morgan had left that behind, maybe it was a clue, a way to find out where he might have taken Ruby. Noah gripped the badge in his hands, his heart pounding. He knew it was important, but he also knew he needed help. He couldn't face Morgan alone, not after everything that had happened. "Ruby," he whispered, feeling the tears return to his eyes. "I'll find you. I promise." With the badge still in his hands, Noah felt a new wave of determination. He knew the answer lay in that name and that organization. It was a start, and he would do whatever it took to bring Ruby back safely. As he looked at the badge, a single word echoed in his mind: Sons of Wealth. Meanwhile, Morgan drove along the deserted road with Ruby tied and motionless in the passenger seat. The silence in the car was almost deafening, interrupted only by the rumble of the engine and Morgan's heavy breathing. He seemed absorbed in his thoughts, his eyes fixed on the road, but there was a glint of somber satisfaction in his gaze. After some time, the car entered through imposing gates that opened automatically, revealing a luxurious property surrounded by immaculate gardens and architecture that exuded opulence. It was the kind of place that seemed to exist only for those at the top of the world, a refuge where obscure secrets were protected by high walls and discreet guards. Ruby was dragged inside a grand hall, her hands still bound and her mouth covered by a tight cloth. The sound of muffled laughter and carefree conversations filled the air. She tried to look around, and what she saw made her stomach churn. Elegantly dressed men and women, crystal glasses in hand, acting as if they were at a party. But there was something sinister in their expressions, something that made the atmosphere even more suffocating. Morgan pushed her into a chair in the center of the hall and tied her wrists to the chair's arms with thick ropes. Around her, members of the Sons of Wealth, an organization that used their fortune and power to manipulate and control, watched her with interest. Among them, to Ruby's shock, was Harrison. "Harrison," she murmured, his name trembling as it left her lips. He was there, impeccably dressed, with the same arrogant look she remembered. He crossed his arms and slowly walked up to her, a cold, cynical smile forming on his face. "Welcome, Ruby," Harrison said, his tone oozing with disdain. "Long time no see. I knew Morgan would eventually find you. He's persistent, after all." Morgan laughed, a dry, contemptuous sound. "You think you're in control here?" he asked, tightening his grip on Ruby's arm. She gasped but tried not to show the fear she felt. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. One wrong move, and I'll kill her." The officers exchanged glances, clearly assessing the situation. "It doesn't have to be this way, Morgan," said one of the agents in a calmer tone. "Let the hostage go and we can talk. You don't need to make things worse." "Talk?" Morgan replied through gritted teeth. "You think this is a game?" "I'm not giving myself up. Not to you and definitely not to her," he said, shooting Ruby a hateful glare. "She caused this. It was always her." Ruby tried to keep her composure, even with the blade pressed against her skin. "Morgan," she said, her voice low and steady, "it's not too late to stop. You're not getting out of this if you keep going. Think about what you're doing." Morgan laughed again, but there was something unhinged in his eyes. "Shut up, Ruby. You think I don't know what I'm doing? You're the reason for all of this. I lost everything because of you. Now you're going to pay the price." Meanwhile, Harrison tried to sneak away from the scene, but one of the officers quickly restrained him. "Stay where you are!" the agent shouted, pointing his gun at him. Harrison raised his hands, his face twisted with anger and fear. The tension in the hall rose with every passing second. The officers kept their weapons trained, waiting for an opening. Morgan, on the other hand, seemed more and more cornered, his desperation growing. Ruby knew he was acting purely on emotion now, and that made him even more dangerous. "Morgan, listen," she said again, trying to appeal to whatever reason he might have left. "You don't have to do this. Let me go and turn yourself in. It doesn't have to end this way." Morgan looked at her for a moment, and for an instant there seemed to be a flicker of hesitation in his eyes. But then he shook his head, pressing the knife even harder against Ruby's throat. "Shut up!" he yelled again, his hands shaking slightly. "I decide how this ends." The officers braced themselves to act, their voices murmuring quiet commands. The tension was at its peak, and everyone knew the next move could determine the outcome of the situation. In the growing chaos, Harrison saw an opportunity to escape. He moved slowly toward the side of the hall, keeping an eye on the officers and the organization members, now trying to hide or negotiate their surrender. When he judged no one was paying attention to him, he started running towards a side exit but didn't get far. "Stop right there," an officer shouted, pointing his gun at him. Harrison froze in place, reluctantly raising his hands. "I have nothing to do with this," he protested, his voice a mix of fear and indignation. "I'm just a guest. I didn't even know what was going on." "You're just as guilty as the others," the officer replied, as another agent approached to cuff him. Any attempt to flee only makes it worse. Harrison continued to grumble as he was led away, but his arrogant demeanor had vanished, replaced by a pale, defeated look. Around him, one by one, the other members of the Sons of Wealth were being apprehended, some still trying to resist verbally, while others accepted their fate in silence. However, Morgan remained steadfast in the center of the hall, clinging to Ruby with even more strength, and now pointing a gun directly at her head. "Nobody move!" he shouted, his voice echoing through the space. His eyes were wild, his hand movements shaky. "You think you've won? You think you can get me? I'm still in control here." The officers paused, keeping their weapons aimed but not advancing. One of the agents stepped forward, trying to calm him down. "Morgan, put the gun down," he said, his voice calm but firm. "There's no way out for you now. Don't do something that'll only make the situation worse." "You don't understand anything," Morgan yelled, pressing the gun harder against Ruby's head. She was breathing heavily but trying to stay as calm as possible, despite the terror she felt. "I have nothing to lose. If I go down, she's coming with me." Ruby looked at him sideways, trying to keep her composure. "Morgan, it doesn't have to end this way," she said, her voice low but laced with determination. "You can still surrender. You can still stop." "Stop?" Morgan laughed, but it was a mirthless laugh filled with frustration. "I've spent my whole life being left behind, being betrayed, being treated like nothing. And now you want me to just give up? No, Ruby. That's not going to happen." As the officers held their positions, one of them whispered discreetly to the others, instructing them to prepare for a possible assault. The tension in the air was almost unbearable. Every movement seemed to last an eternity, and everyone knew that any rash action could put Ruby in danger. Ruby, for her part, tried to remain calm, even as she felt the cold barrel of the gun against her head. She knew she needed to keep talking, keep Morgan distracted long enough to give the police a chance to act. "Morgan," she said, with a steadiness that surprised even herself, "do you really think this will give you what you want? It won't change anything. You won't walk out of here as the powerful man you imagine yourself to be. All you'll do is destroy what's left of you." Ruby's words seemed to strike something in Morgan, for he hesitated for a brief moment. But his expression quickly hardened again, and he shouted again, "Shut up, you don't know anything." The officers took advantage of this hesitation to slowly approach, each moving in silence while keeping their guns trained. The tension continued to grow. The hall plunged into an almost absolute silence, broken only by the occasional murmurs of surrender from the other members and Harrison's distant grumblings as he was led away. The decisive moment was approaching, and everyone knew they would need to act with precision. Ruby's life hung by a thread, and the next few seconds would be crucial in deciding the outcome of that terrifying night. Morgan began to breathe with difficulty, sweat dripping down his forehead. He looked around, realizing he was surrounded. There was no more escape. The officers approached slowly, their weapons firm and ready to act. Morgan's hand, which held the gun to Ruby's head, began to visibly tremble. He knew he had no way out. "Morgan," said the closest officer, his voice firm but calm, "it's the end of the line. Drop the gun. Don't complicate things further for yourself." Ruby felt the pressure of the gun lighten slightly on her head. She knew Morgan was faltering. "You can stop, Morgan," she said, in a tone that mixed calm and compassion. "It doesn't have to end like this, just surrender." Morgan's internal conflict was evident in his eyes. For a moment he looked at Ruby, and his expression changed from anger to something that seemed almost regretful. Slowly he lowered the gun, dropping it to the floor. "You've won," he muttered, his voice laden with weariness and resignation. "Take me." The officers acted immediately, ushering Ruby to safety and quickly handcuffing Morgan. He didn't resist, letting himself be taken away. As he was escorted out of the hall, the once formidable Morgan seemed a shadow of himself, defeated by the weight of his own choices. Ruby fell to her knees, breathing deeply as she tried to process what had just happened. Before she could fully recompose herself, she heard a familiar voice calling her name. "Mom!" Noah shouted, running across the hall towards her. Ruby looked up and saw her son coming towards her. Tears began to roll before she could say anything. Noah threw himself into her arms, hugging her tightly, as if afraid she would disappear again. Ruby held him with the same intensity, sobbing with relief. "Are you okay?" Noah asked, pulling away slightly to look her in the eyes. "Did he hurt you?" Ruby shook her head, still trying to regain her voice. "I'm okay now," she whispered, caressing Noah's face. "Thanks to you." Noah looked at her with a mixture of relief and pain. "Why did you never tell me? Why didn't you ever say you were my mother?" Ruby swallowed hard, feeling the guilt crush her again. I was afraid, my son," she replied, her voice trembling. "Afraid of what they could do to you. Afraid you wouldn't forgive me. I wasn't strong enough to face the past. But now I see I should have told you from the beginning." Noah hugged her again, tighter this time. "You don't need to be afraid anymore," he said, his voice laden with emotion. "Now we're together, and no one is going to separate us." Ruby held his face between her hands, smiling through her tears. "I promise I'll never hide anything from you again, my son. Never again." As the officers finalized the operation, taking Morgan and the other members of the Sons of Wealth away, Ruby and Noah remained embraced, finding comfort in each other. The nightmare was finally over, and a new chapter in their lives was just beginning. When they left the courtroom, the sunlight seemed brighter than ever. Noah held his mother's hand as they walked along the busy sidewalk. "It's over now, isn't it?" he asked, his voice laden with hope. Ruby looked at him and smiled, squeezing his hand. "Yes, my son, it's over. We can finally move forward." The following months were marked by changes. Ruby and Noah moved to a small town, far away from all the places that carried painful memories. The house they chose was simple, but comfortable. It was on a quiet street, with a backyard that would soon become their favorite haven. Ruby started working as a seamstress, turning simple fabrics into beautiful pieces that caught the attention of the locals. Her skill not only provided her with a livelihood, but also helped her connect with the community. She made friends and found a sense of belonging she had never had before. Noah, on the other hand, returned to school. At first, it was difficult to adjust. He had lost years of learning, and the age difference from his classmates made him feel out of place. But with Ruby's support, he persisted. Soon, his teachers realized he had a special talent for writing. His stories, often inspired by his own experiences, were filled with emotion and humanity. He began winning awards in school competitions, and it filled him with pride. Despite the positive changes, there were days when the past came back to haunt them. Noah sometimes woke up in the middle of the night, sweating cold, with images of snow and oppressive silence in his mind. On other occasions, he remembered Ruby's screams when Morgan took her away, or Harrison's cruel gaze. At those moments, he wondered how they had survived it all. Ruby, in turn, carried the weight of guilt. Despite all the love she now shared with Noah, she still wondered if she could have done something different to protect him. But whenever those thoughts haunted her, Noah was there to reassure her. "You did the best you could," he said once, as the two sat in the backyard under the stars. "And now we're here together. That's all that matters." Ruby smiled at him, her eyes filled with tears. "I just want you to know that I'll never stop regretting the time we lost, but I promise to do everything in my power to make the future better." Over time, Noah began to stand out even more at school. His writings not only moved his teachers, but also caught the attention of a local organization that promoted young talents. They offered him a scholarship to attend creative writing workshops and events with renowned authors. Noah, though hesitant at first, accepted the opportunity. Ruby was by his side, proud on the first day he attended one of those workshops. "You're amazing, Noah," she said as she dropped him off. "Don't be afraid to show the world how special you are." Noah smiled, though he still felt a little nervous. "I'll try, Mom. For you." The workshops opened an entirely new world for Noah. He met young people from different backgrounds, each with their own stories and dreams. For the first time, he felt he wasn't alone, that there were others like him, trying to turn pain into art. As the end of the year approached, Ruby and Noah faced the Christmas season with mixed feelings. The holiday had been a source of trauma for both of them, but it also represented a rebirth. This time, they decided to approach the date differently. Instead of focusing on the painful memories, they would use the moment to celebrate the new life they had built. Together, they decorated the house with simple ornaments. Noah insisted on setting up a small Christmas tree, something he had never done before. "I think it's time to start new traditions," he said, as he adjusted a star on top of the tree. Ruby agreed, emotional. "Yes, my son, new traditions." On Christmas Eve, they decided to invite some neighbors over for a small celebration. It was a night filled with laughter and casual conversation, something neither of them had ever experienced before. When the guests left, Ruby and Noah sat at the table looking at the twinkling lights on the tree. "Do you think we're really free now?" Noah asked, breaking the silence. Ruby looked at him, thinking for a moment. "I think freedom isn't something that happens all at once. It's something we build every day, and I think we're on the right path." The years continued to pass, and Noah blossomed as Ruby had always believed he would. With hard work and dedication, he excelled in school, reaching the top of his class and earning the respect of teachers and peers. When it came time to enter college, Noah earned a full academic scholarship to a prestigious institution, a feat that brought tears of pride to Ruby's eyes. She had never doubted his ability, but seeing her son triumph over all adversity was more than she could ask for. During his college years, Noah began working on his first book, inspired by his experiences and the strength he found by his mother's side. He spent countless nights writing, revising, and rewriting, determined to turn his memories into something that could touch other people. When he finally showed Ruby the first drafts, she was speechless, feeling a mix of pride and emotion. "You're going to change the world, Noah," she said one night as she carefully read the bound pages. "I have no doubt about that. Your story will inspire so many people." Noah smiled, somewhat shyly. "I just want to share our story," he replied, his voice full of sincerity. "I want people to know that even when everything seems lost, it's possible to find a way out. I want them to understand that strength lies within them." Ruby held his hands, squeezing them tenderly. "And you're doing it wonderfully, my son. Never doubt how special you are." On the following Christmas, Noah returned home for the college holidays, bringing with him the vibrant energy of a young man who had found his purpose. Ruby awaited him at the door, smiling with tears in her eyes as she always did when he came back. The house, though simple, was decorated with twinkling lights and small ornaments they had bought together over the years. "It looks so beautiful here," Noah commented as he entered, looking around. "You've outdone yourself, Mom." "Oh, I knew you'd be coming, so I wanted to do something special," Ruby replied, hugging him tightly. "And how are things at college? Are you taking care of yourself, eating properly?" Noah laughed. "Mom, I'm fine, better than fine actually, but nothing compares to being home with you." They spent the night cooking together, a tradition they had recently started. As they chopped vegetables and stirred pots, they reminisced about good and bad times, the weight of the past now lighter in their hearts. The conversation flowed naturally, filled with laughter and memories that reinforced the unbreakable bond between them. When midnight came, Noah led Ruby to the backyard, where he had set up a small space with colored lights and a carefully decorated table. In the center, a simple but lovingly made cake awaited. "This is for you, Mom," he said, pointing to the cake. "To thank you for everything you've done for me. You gave me strength when I needed it most. You gave me hope when I had none. This is just a small gesture to show how much you mean to me." Ruby was moved, feeling tears rolling down her cheeks without restraint. "You didn't have to do anything like this, Noah," she said, hugging him tightly. "But I'm the luckiest person in the world to have you as my son. You are my greatest gift." The two sat at the table and raised an impromptu toast with mugs of hot chocolate. As the Christmas lights shone around them, Noah and Ruby shared a moment of peace that seemed to transcend time. It was not just a holiday celebration. It was a reaffirmation of all they had overcome together. After the toast, Noah looked up at the starry sky, lost in thought. "You know, Mom," he began, his voice soft, "sometimes I think about everything we've been through and wonder how we made it here. It seems like a miracle, doesn't it?" Ruby nodded, following his gaze to the sky. "Yes, my son, it does seem like one. But it wasn't just a miracle. It was your strength, your determination. It was the love that kept us together, and above all, it was the decision to never give up on each other. Noah smiled, feeling a wave of gratitude grow within him, so intense it almost spilled from his eyes. I could never have done it without you, Mom. Every step I took was because you were there, guiding me even when the world seemed to be crumbling around us. You gave me strength, even when you had none for yourself. You gave me hope, even when there seemed to be none. And now, more than ever, I want to give back. I want to do for you what you did for me, to make sure you never want for anything. His voice trembled slightly, but the smile persisted, warming the atmosphere. Ruby squeezed his hand affectionately, as her eyes shone with a mixture of pride and emotion. You already do, Noah, every day. Each of your gestures, each word, is proof that you've become the man I always dreamed you'd be. No matter the challenges, you faced them with courage and never gave up, neither on yourself nor on me, and I know you will do that for many others too, because that's who you are, my son. Your words have the power to inspire, to heal, to bring light to those in darkness. The world needs that, Noah. It needs your heart. Noah swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his mother's words hitting him squarely. He looked at her face, so familiar, marked by time, yet still filled with a beauty that only a life lived intensely can bring. You always told me that the most valuable things can't be bought, Mom, and now I understand that more than ever. The love, courage, and resilience you taught me are the greatest treasures I could ever have. They've brought me to this point, and if the world needs me, it's because you first gave me to the world. You taught me to be strong, to never give up, to always believe that something good can emerge, even from the worst situations. Ruby caressed his face with her free hand, her eyes filling with tears. Noah, you are my greatest gift. Watching you grow, overcome obstacles, and become such a special person fills me with joy and pride. But what moves me most is seeing how you never forget where you came from, never forget who stood by your side. That's what makes you a unique person. And I know that what you're doing, the path you've chosen, will impact many lives. You have a gift, Noah, a gift for connecting, for touching people's hearts. Use it wisely and never lose the essence of who you are. He squeezed her hand back harder now, as if he wanted to convey all the love he felt at that moment. I'm only like this because you never let me forget who I am, Mom. You showed me what it means to fight for what's right, even when the world is against you. That's what I want to take with me in everything I do. I want to honor what you taught me and spread it, Mom. If I can touch one person's life, the way you touched mine, it will have been worth it. Ruby smiled, letting a tear roll down her face. And you will, Noah. I'm sure of it. Because the love you carry is greater than any obstacle that may arise. And it's that love that will transform the world around you. Remember, my son, that true success does not lie in material conquests, but in the lives we touch along the way. And looking at you, I already know that you are more successful than I could ever imagine. The silence that followed was filled with a profound understanding between the two of them, a connection that transcended words. For Noah, his mother's presence was a constant reminder that he would never be alone, no matter how difficult the journey became. And for Ruby, seeing the man Noah had become was the reward for a lifetime of sacrifices. They didn't need to say anything else in that moment. The love they shared was evident in every gesture, every look. Finally, Noah broke the silence, his voice soft but firm. I promise, Mom. I promise I'll take this forward. Everything you taught me, all the love you put into me, I'll pass it on, through my words, my actions, or simply by being present for those who need it. I want you to know that no matter what happens, you will always be my inspiration, the reason I keep going. Ruby nodded slowly, the smile remaining on her lips. And I'll always be here for you, Noah, in every choice you make, in every step you take. Even when I can no longer be physically by your side, you'll have my strength, my love, to guide you. Never forget that, my son. Noah leaned in to embrace her, enveloping her in a gesture that said everything words could not express. It was an embrace filled with gratitude, respect, and above all, love. A love that was the foundation of everything he was and everything he would become. If you enjoyed this story, take the opportunity to leave your like and subscribe to our channel. Your participation is essential for us to continue bringing exciting and inspiring content almost daily. Don't miss the next incredible story that is coming. We appreciate your company and support. And look, on your screen you'll find special links to more stories we've carefully chosen for you. Click right now and discover narratives full of emotion and unforgettable moments. We're waiting for you there.